in Nairobi and told me that the goals laid out at that summit are ambitious but attainable. There was a lot of discussion about money as well, as there always is at these things, and frustrations expressed about how wealth flows to Africa, that often there are conditions attached to it. What can be done to improve that situation?
That is certainly the number one issue. We agree on the leadership of the continent and what our narrative should be. And we can all also agree that climate finance is inefficient, it's insufficient, and it's unfair.
Now, some $23 billion was announced at the summit. How much of that do you think is an actual commitment, and how much of it is well-intentioned but may never end up being delivered?
I must say that some part of that 23 million was already announced, 23 billion was already announced during COP27. So we still really need to go back and dissect some of those figures to see exactly how much will go into our communities and into the economies, and it's new money. So really, there's still so much more to be done. If we're looking at even just the balance sheets of MDBs, we need more. Countries like Botswana, like Egypt, really do need a lot more to deal with the adaptation and resilience funding needs. The funding gap is still way too high, particularly if we even consider the fact that many African countries, about 67% of them, they have competing needs. The debt servicing need is much higher than even what they allocate to education or healthcare.
On that, what do you say to those who raise concerns when it comes to funding these programs around that heavy level of indebtedness, or concerns about corruption, or concerns about conflict, such as what we're seeing in Niger and Gabon at the moment?
But concerns about corruption, why does it only come up when we are looking at Africa? I mean, there is corruption in the US, there's corruption in Latin America, and yet no one seems to center the conversation of corruption in those other markets. We have seen, in part, an almost failure of systems, even in the global north, and that has not jacked up the rates, the lending rates that are associated with those markets. So I think, first and foremost, we do need to go back to looking at this perception of risk of investment in the continent. The default rates are not as high as they are perceived to be. There are some African institutions that have been lending in the continent that haven't had as high default rates as has been positioned. Similarly, there are other international financial institutions that are operating here that can point to that there is actually some sort of stability. There is also reliability when it comes to investing in the continent. Granted, we have seen in the last couple of months some coups ensuing in West Africa, and we must note that the continent is not homogeneous. We have different countries, we have different governance systems, but even the countries with the best governance systems do not attract a sufficient amount of FDI to meet the adaptation and resilience needs, let alone the mitigation needs.
Now, the focus of the whole summit, of course, was on climate change, and we see the UN Weather Agency saying that the Earth had its hottest 3 months on record this year. How is that manifesting itself on the continent?
Oh, it's manifesting itself certainly in droughts and very erratic weather systems that are leading to instability in the food ecosystem as well. And in just, it's generally affecting livelihoods, very hot temperatures, droughts, El Nino, and we are sure that we will continue to see increased vulnerabilities and them affecting or increasing shocks to our economic spaces and increasing economic disparities as well. Which is why we need to really unlock more finance, not only for mitigation purposes, but particularly for adaptation and resilience building. This is what we will ensure that we also reduce any further societal challenges that could potentially lead to climate migration. No one wants climate immigration, and no one wants communities to be fighting for water or fighting for food. So we need to build resilience now, make sure that there is also good shelter and good infrastructure. And this is our joint and common 1.5-degree future. But we must note that the continent contributed very little to this problem and therefore must, in one way or another, be met halfway to help us realize our common goals.
Lots more to talk about this, but we'll leave it there for the moment. Bogolo, Kenewendo, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.